Whew, all right. Operating on the assumption you're done seeing that 2 videos there talking about, maybe I'll combine them even, talking about how S equals I in the neoclassical and mainstream model and in Keynes's or the post-Keynesian model. And hello, doggy. The bottom line is that I wanted to show you the idea in the mainstream view that the economy basically took care of itself, that it was tended towards stability, and that's also going to be a story that's going to come out now and then when I talk about it in terms of their view of exchange rates, that currency prices tend to, in the same way that the interest rate adjusts, the exchange rate will adjust in order to restore full employment in a country. All right, so we'll get to that a little later. That's why I wanted to see that one. And then, of course, the alternate view from Keynes is like, well, that'd be great, wouldn't it? But that's not really the way the process works. And he's also, well, he's not going to say it because he really didn't talk much about exchange rates. But in the post-Keynesian view of exchange rates, are going to be, yeah, and they don't adjust to fix everything either. It's unfortunately not that simple. So that's why you did those 2 things. And that totally ends the macro review. All right, so there's the macro review done. Now, in chapter 3 of the book, it talks a little bit about the structure of foreign currency markets with wholesalers and retailers and customers and so forth. It's all pretty easy to read. I'll let you go through all that yourself. I did want to say a word about the one concept that comes up in there. I'll never forget when I found this book. I was trying to figure out exchange rates. Gosh, I guess maybe the 2nd or 3rd year after I got at this ECU, which had been about 1990. And I thought that they were very poorly explained in the mainstream. And I thought that the post-Keynesian view, which I thought made more sense to me, didn't address it. So I thought, well, I want to figure it out myself. And so I was always after stuff that described how actual currency dealers operated. I wanted the description of, what the office was like, that sort of thing, because I felt like I was trying to figure out. I lean towards the idea that I want to know how the real institution works, all right? Rather than sort of, well, I'm sorry, I'm getting into stuff that would be relevant in contending perspectives, but not in here. And so one of the books I found was really interesting, and it talked about how those at the highest level of the currency market, the wholesalers who are carrying out the big banks, the transactions starting in the millions, when you contact one of them, they as it explains in the book, they'll offer a 2-way deal. I can call, well, nowadays it'd be on the computer, but in the old days you would call them and say, Deutschmarks. You wouldn't just probably yell that, but I don't know. And they would give you a bid and ask price for Deutschmarks because, this is my point, they would stand ready to buy or sell from you. They would give you the buy and sell price. Whereas when you go to a foreign exchange kiosk at, let me back up there. And then after that, of course, you already had in mind whether you were buying or selling, but they would stand ready to buy or sell in any volume all day long, all right? Now, when you've got a foreign exchange kiosk at DFW Airport, they're mostly selling dollars, all right? It's people that are coming to America from another country. I don't even know if people use those anymore because it's so easy to just use your ATM card now. But coming from foreign countries, and oh no, all I've got's rubles. So you stop by the little booth there and you buy some dollars. Or all I've got's pesos. Oh, we're an American coming back from Mexico and they have pesos left over. They'll trade that in. So they're mostly selling dollars. They're not really, there's not a big market for buying pesos. Well, maybe pesos more so, but buying rubles at DFW Airport. I know they're willing to buy or sell at that booth, but really and truly, it's in limited quantities. They're going to sell you all the dollars you want, but they're not really going to buy a whole lot of rubles and so forth. Buy a lot of dollars to sell you rubles because they ain't got that many rubles. Whereas, at the wholesale level, they are buying and selling in massive quantities all day long, both directions. So how do they make any money? The gap between the price at which they will buy and the price at which they will sell. And of course, these are fractions of a penny. But if you have a very high volume, then it doesn't matter. You're going to make a lot of money off of and that's the spread. That's the spread right there between the buy price and the sell price. Now, go ahead, chase that dog. The recycling truck just showed up and he can hear it. The problem is, let's say I'm one of those big banks. Let's say I'm a dealer at one of those big banks. It sounds like I don't care about which currency we're talking about because I'm going to buy or sell, right? I care a lot. Because what I don't want to have happen is over the course of the day, accumulate a big inventory of euros. All right, because I just want to make the money on the spread. I don't want to speculate in currency. And if I accumulate a big inventory of euros, now I'm speculating in euros. I'm going to hope the euro goes up and not down. I just want to make money off of you. All I want to make money from is people buying and selling. So here's the spread. But that spread can be at a variety of different prices. You know, as that currency becomes more expensive, I've got the same, as the currency becomes more expensive, I may have the same spread than as the currency becomes cheaper, but it doesn't matter to me whether the currency is cheap expensive or cheap, right? I just make money off the spread, and I don't want to care. That was very delayed, much longer after the garbage truck left. Anyway, so I face a real problem in the morning. I've got to set the price. I've got to set the price in the place. I don't mean the spread, I mean the price. Right? I've got to set it in the place that I think will generate an equal amount of money in both directions. If I make the ruble too expensive, then I'm going to accumulate a lot of rubles because people are going to sell them to me, but I'm not going to sell any back to anybody, right? And I don't want to speculate in rubles. If I set it too low, then I'm going to have an excess demand for rubles, and I'm going to accumulate whatever currency people are trading for the ruble. I want to hit the sweet spot where I get as many rubles coming in as going out. At the end of the day, how many rubles have we got? None, because we sold every one that we got in. It was perfect. But we sold them for more than we bought them for. That's what I want to do. I don't want an inventory. Now, in reality, we're going to keep a bit of an inventory of every currency as a buffer. But ideally, in a perfect world, that buffer is zero. All right. So I hope you're getting the idea now that even as a wholesaler who stands ready to buy and sell all day long in any quantity, I actually have a goal in terms of quantity, and that is equal in and out. All right. And so I need to set that price in the spot, and I'm going to give you a betting example here in a minute, in a place that gives me an equal volume in both directions. The book I was reading was talking about how challenging that is, particularly if in the morning, with this price of this currency, where let's say I've set up a relatively high price of this currency, I'm accumulating a lot of it because people are wanting to sell it to me because I'm setting a high price, but they're unwilling to buy it from me because I'm setting a high price. And so I'm accumulating an inventory of it. I have to decide, is that inventory just a coincidence? Does there happen to be a number of transactions, big ones this morning, that are wanting, let's keep with rubles, are wanting to unload rubles? Or did I miss a trend? Am I wrong that this price will generate an equal volume all day long? Do I need to lower it? So I will quit attracting rubles and maybe get rid of them, all right? And I thought that was kind of neat. You know, the idea that even at the wholesale level, they're really worried. They're like, we've got to set that price in the right spot, or we may not be able to generate that equal volume that we want. And furthermore, we have to decide, in fact, here's something from the book here. Since they have by definition no desire to take a position in the market, it is their goal to quote currency prices that generate an equal volume of business on both sides of the market. Wholesaling requires that one determine whether or not the timing of orders that pile up on one side of the market is coincidental or indicative of an unexpected trend. Not a huge deal, but I really, really enjoyed reading the stuff that was about practical knowledge about what their lives were like, because I felt like that then led to a more realistic vision of how to understand exchange rates in theory. Yeah, you can read the rest of that. Okay, now I think I am up to, all right. I've been telling you, we're going to do some psychology stuff, and we're about to do that. And then we just have two more little concepts left. So let's do that. Let's see, 9 minutes in. Okay, so let's do the psychology stuff now. Let's hope the dog is done barking at the garbage truck. All right, so here's kind of the second to last big topic before exam 1, which fortunately I don't have to take because I've already got a college degree. All right, let's see here. How's that? That's not bad. Okay, so a couple years ago, I put together a little slide thing here with some summaries of all the factors related to the foreign exchange, to psychology in the foreign exchange market. Let's see what chapter this is in the book. This is chapter 3. Yeah, chapter 3. All right. And first of all, okay, funny joke. Investors are rational. Ha ha ha. You're hilarious, right? Now, the orthodox view, the neoclassical view, when they talk about forecasting, they don't see forecasting as that big a deal, okay? And I want to explain why. This is, as I said, this is one of the reasons why I wanted you to see that thing about the neoclassical view of how S equals I, because I want you to get a sense of their idea that markets are stable and tend towards full employment. Well, this is not as directly related as some other concepts will be, but it is related. There are neoclassical studies. Okay, let me back up a little bit. Back in the 1980s, there started to be publications of surveys of currency dealers' forecasts. For example, oh man, he wants to play now. I bought, with your money, thank you, some data from McGraw-Hill where they had interviewed like 30 currency dealers every Monday. And I don't know if it was the same 30 or what, I don't remember anymore. But and they would ask them, where do you think the Deutschmark will be in a week? Where do you think it'll be in a month? And then they averaged those numbers and they sold them. And they sold them to people in real time for a lot of money, because they were then using that to speculate. But then they sold them to professors like me for a really cheap rate, because then that was the old data that you really couldn't use for forecasting, but you could use for research. And so a really nice man was in charge of all that. He cut us some really good deals based on what the actual price was. He's like, let's just have that. So, okay. Apparently they were making a lot of money off of the people that were buying it in real time. So, a lot of economists were using these data that hadn't been available before of forecasts of foreign currency prices. And I'll tell you the reason why, since you asked. Neoclassical, and I have the book downstairs, I wish I had it up here with me, but neoclassical economics has had a tough time coming up with a single theory of exchange rates. They have a bunch of different ones, and none of them work very well, by their admission. And so in the 1980s, they thought, well, let's examine not broad theories, but some specific, narrower issues in exchange rate theory. One of them being rational expectations. The idea that a rational individual, on average, will make the correct forecast. And let me give you an example here, once again with dice. Okay. What would a rational individual predict the role of these two dice to be? Well, let's see. There is one combination that will give us a 2. There are 2 combinations that will give us a 3. There's one of them. And there's the other one. All right. There are, and it keeps on going up. There are 3 combinations that will give you a 4, 4 that will give you a 5, 5 that will give you a 6, 6 that will give you a 7, and then it reverses. It goes back down again. There's only 1 that'll give you a 6, and 2 that'll give you a, 1 that'll give you a 12, 2 that'll give you 11, on like that. So it turns out that this is the most common outcome. Either like that, or like that. 7 is the most common roll. And if you think about it, by the way, think of it this way. Let's say you roll one die at a time and you've rolled the first one. Can you roll a 2 now? No. Can you roll a 1? No. Can you roll a 5? No. You can roll a 6 or you can roll anything from 6 on up now, right? 6 on up to 11. You can roll a 6 or a 7 or an 8 or a 9 or a 10 or an 11. There's only one number you can always still roll after you've rolled the first die. It doesn't matter whether this comes up as 1 or 6, you can still roll a 7, right? So 7 turns out to be the most common number. So, according to neoclassical rational expectations theory, a rational individual would always predict a 7. Because that's the only guess. Now now notice you'll be wrong most of the time, but your errors will be entirely random and distributed evenly on either side of 7. So a rational individual would always pick 7. All right, so that's how they're thinking about exchange rate forecasts. They're wanting to check the forecast against the actual outcome. They're wanting to check, and now let me get my pen out here and point at these. They're wanting to look at the forecast of period 2. Here's period 1. People are going to make a forecast during period 1 of period. I don't know, why do I have the accurate written? Oh, I see. That accurate is not in that cell up there. It's next to the arrow. Sorry, the accurate's not in that cell, which is what I thought originally. It's next to that arrow. They're always checking this. They're checking, was the forecast made in period T of period T plus 1, was it accurate? All right? Just like, hey, what do you think we're going to roll? That's period 1. Now we're going to roll it. That's period 2. Were you right or not? So they had all these forecast data. They had all these forecast data. And they had the actual outcomes, right? So they have forecasts of period T plus 1 in period T, and they already had period T plus 1 outcomes. So they could compare these. Now, it didn't work very well, right, first of all. But that's really not where I want to go with this. Which was fascinating. It's not often in economics where you can publish a paper that says, hey, I tried it and it didn't work. But there were lots of papers that were like, hey, I tried it and it didn't work. And they were saying, hey, by this standard, forecasts are not rational. Now, that could be because the theory's wrong, or that could be because the data's wrong. We don't know. But it wasn't encouraging. That's not really what I want to get at here. What I want to get at here is that the idea that in the neoclassical view, the forecast and the outcome are being considered independent of one another. Our forecasts have no impact on the outcome. In the post-Keynesian view, it's saying the aggregate forecast is the outcome. The aggregate forecast creates the outcome. So that when we use forecast data here, what we're trying to see is, given the opening price, and then the forecast, not of period T, but of period T plus 1, because think about it. If during period T, you make a forecast of period T plus 1 that says you think the euro is going to appreciate, do you wait until period T plus 1 to buy the euro? Or do you buy the euro in period T? Let me say that again. You make a forecast in period T of where you think the euro is going to be in period T plus 1. And let's say you think it's going to appreciate. Do you buy the euro in period T plus 1 after it's already appreciated? Or do you buy it in period T, hold it, and hope it appreciates like you thought it would, and then sell it? So the post-Keynesian view is that these forecasts are driving the actual prices. That the forecasts are, not your individual one necessarily, but the aggregate forecast of the market in general, is driving the price. So what we should really see a relationship between is not this cell and this cell. There's no reason. Well, there might be a relationship there. There might not be, but that's not what the post-Keynesians are concerned with. They're concerned with, here's the opening bell. Here was the forecast you were making at the opening bell. And then here's the closing price. So, for example, at the opening bell, the euro is worth $1. But you think the euro is going to be worth $1.10 by period T plus 1. It's going to appreciate. So you immediately buy the euro. So the euro goes from $1, not necessarily all the way to $1.10, because you might not have complete confidence in your forecast. But nevertheless, it's going to go from. I'm sorry, I just remembered something I meant to tell you in the last video, on the last thing I was talking about. But anyway, so we're going to be thinking here of the forecast not as some factor that is unrelated to the outcome. Sorry, dog, that scared him. Not as some factor that's unrelated to the outcome, as is true here. Your forecast has no impact on the outcome. We're going to be thinking of the forecast as something that directly affects the outcome, okay? So the reason why the forecast is so important to us here is because we're not seeing it as independent of the outcome. We're seeing it as a major causal factor in the outcome, as it is in any financial market. Therefore, we need to know how they are making those forecasts if we're going to figure out what drives currency prices. Okay, before I go any further, okay, I'll stop right there. This is what I meant to tell you in the whole spread exchange rate thing a minute ago. I was going to give you an analogy. You know when you see betting lines for sports, like the Cowboys are expected to beat the Giants by 6.5 points, and they do the half just so it's impossible for it to be exactly 6. All right, so why? If the Cowboys are expected to beat the Giants by 6.5 points, did some clever sports analyst come up with that? No, not necessarily. The whole reason for a betting line is to generate an equal amount of money for the Cowboys and against the Cowboys. All right, let me say it again. The reason for that betting line, for when it says the Cowboys are favored by 6.5. Now, I'll tell you how that works in practice here in just a second, but the point of that is to generate an equal amount of money for and against the Cowboys. So, because the person taking the bet doesn't want to care who wins. All right? They just want to make money off the fact that when you pay them $1 and you win, you get $1.90 back. They don't give you $2 back. They give you $1.90. They keep a dime. They're going to keep a dime out of every dollar, or actually, I guess it's out of 5 cents out of every dollar. But anyway, they're going to keep some of the money. If winning doubles your money, well, they're not going to double it. They're going to like 1.8 times it or 1.9 times it and keep the rest. So they don't want to care who wins. They don't want all the money to be on the Cowboys and then have the Cowboys win. Oh my God, we're going to pay out big time. We want an equal amount. And the way that works is, the way betting works is on say, football games is, you don't bet on a team to win. You bet on a team to win by a certain amount. Let's say 6.5. So the Cowboys have to win by 6.5 or more, which essentially means 7, right? Because you can't have a half a point. They have to win by 7 or more to count it as the Cowboys won. If the Cowboys win by 6 or less, or the Giants win, then the Cowboys in the bet have lost. Now, what if all kinds of people start betting on the Cowboys? We start the betting line at 6.5, but all kinds of people still bet on the Cowboys. Now you know what I do? As the person taking the bet, I change it to 7.5 or 8.5. Now, those people who have already placed bets get to keep the 6.5, but I'm trying to stop the money from coming in on one side. I'm trying to even out the money because I don't want to care who wins. Same thing as I was talking about a minute ago with the wholesalers. They don't want to accumulate an inventory so that they then suddenly care whether the currency appreciates or depreciates. Man, I just want the money off the spread. All right. So anyway, that's a really, for some people, it's a really useful example. For others, it's not. But I mention it every year until just now. And so I just remembered. All right. So backing up here, the exchange rates are going to be driven by the capital flows, wherein forecasts of the future are the most important determinant. Right. So how are those forecasts created? Well, all right. First of all, before you make any decision, and there's a bunch of this is from the psychology literature rather than economics. There's a breakdown of the stages of the steps you take before you make a decision. First one is eventuality analysis. You consider all the possible future, and I'm going to give you some examples here in just a minute, so it's not just going to be just this little chart here. I'll give you specific examples. You try to decide, what do you think is going to happen in the future? Well, let's see here. So let's say you're thinking about, buying or selling the euro, and you're trying to decide whether or not Macron, the president of France, is going to do so-and-so, or the Bundesbank is going to do so-and-so. So you go through and try to imagine all the possible future states of the world. Then you think about each possible future state of the world compared to the alternatives you have available to you. Like, okay, let's see. If Macron shoots, good Lord, Merkel, the German Prime Minister, Prime Minister? Yeah, Prime Minister. Then that might cause the euro to fall, So I'm going to cross-reference these possible outcomes with my choices, which are basically going to be buy or sell the euro or buy or sell the yen or whatever. And I'm going to think about the impact on me of each choice under each possible future, and then I'm going to rank them. All right. And by the way, you're going to go back and forth here. You're going to think back over this issue again and go back to this one and so forth. But then finally, you got to buy or sell. Finally, you got to make a choice. Now, you did this same thing when you decided to go to college. Well, I mean, if you're like me, you just figured you're going to go to college. But I mean, in some sense, well, let's see, what's the future going to look like? Okay, I'll give you an example right here. Back when I was in college, when I started in '79, oil prices were still very high. So everybody and his and her brother and sister was majoring in geology because they wanted to go out and work in the oil industry. So they were imagining a future state of the world where the oil prices were still really high. They then compared the world that they expected to exist with the various majors they could do. You know, am I going to major in literature, or am I going to major in geology, or whatever? And then they ranked those majors, those choices, and then they majored in geology, which turned out to be a really bad choice because then the gas prices collapsed. Now, this fifth step here, people don't always undertake that. And in fact, psychologists say they rarely undertake it in a sophisticated, systematic manner. But the idea is that you look back on your choice and you try to say, hey, what did I do right? What did I do wrong? And so that's post-event assessment to change the next one. So here's some eventuality analysis. Let's say there are 3 possible futures. And I don't know if you know this game or not. Rock, paper, scissors. Let's see. Do I have? Yeah, I have the rules next. Okay, back up here. So there's 3. You are playing a game against a friend, and there are 3 possible futures. Your friend shows rock, your friend shows scissors, or your friend shows paper. All right? Those are the 3 possible states of the world. So that's eventuality analysis. Backing up here, all probable future states of the world. Right? Now, what are my choices given those future states of the world? Now, the rules are summarized right here, that paper wraps a rock, paper on paper is a tie, paper on scissors, scissors cut the paper. If I started with rock, I'm covered by paper. If I started with rock, though, I break scissors. And then if I started with scissors, I can cut paper, but I'm broken by a rock. All right? So those are the rules. So if you look down at the very bottom here, across the top are the possible futures. And let's say, knowing my friend, hey, let's say my friend is missing a couple of fingers. So they ain't going to do scissors. I got scissors. That's not scissors. That's hang loose, baby. So they're missing a couple of fingers. So it's probably unfair to play this game with them. But you think it's very unlikely that they'll go with scissors. 1/4 with paper. But really, they're going to do the rock every time because that's the easiest thing for them to do. All right, so there's the possible future states of the world. Now, what choices are available to you? Well, I could pick rock, I could pick paper, or I could pick scissors. And we're going to bet $1 on this game every time. And if you win, you get $1. If you lose $1. And if you both do the same thing, then it's a tie and we do it again. And so here we're defining the choices and the consequences. Here are my choices, and in each cell are the consequences. And so if we both pick rock, it's going to be a 0. If we both pick paper, I'm going to win $1. I'm sorry, I'm an idiot. If I pick paper and you pick rock, I win $1, and so on. And then over here, I'm weighting those, and this really kind of gets into the next part of the decision, but I'm weighting them by how likely they are. Because remember, I think there's 0 chance that I'm going to be facing scissors, so all of these values may as well be 0. And then I can multiply all these by 0.25 because I believe there's a 0.25 chance that any one of these will happen. And then I can multiply these by a 0.75 because I'm figuring there's a 0.75 chance that any of these will happen. 0% chance, 25% chance, 75% chance. So let's just look across the rock column. If I pick rock, and then I figure there's a 3/4 chance my opponent's going to pick rock, which is going to be a 0. There's a 1/4 chance they might pick paper. I could lose $0.25. I could lose $1. 1/4 of the time I could lose $1, which on average is $0.25. But they're not going to pick scissors. So this is a bad choice for me. Rock is a bad choice. on average, I'm going to lose a quarter. At best, I would win $1, but I don't really think that's ever going to happen because I got a zero there. So that's what you're doing. You're reading across here. If I pick paper, since 75% of the time I think they'll pick rock, then I'm going to multiply 0.75 by $1. I got 75 cents. If I pick paper and they pick paper, it's a draw. If I pick paper and they pick scissors, then I lose $1, but I don't think they're picking scissors. So I'm multiplying that likelihood by 0. So that's a 75% choice. And, go on down like that. So that once you look at the possible futures, which you did in the first step, your choices, looking at the matrix that defines the likelihood or the outcome, rather, I should say it that way, of this choice with that future, and then the likelihoods, now you can rank them. The best choice is paper, the second best choice is rock, and the third best choice is scissors. All right. So now I choose, and let me go back to the list again. I've got eventuality analysis. That's when you're trying to figure out what your opponent's going to pick. Then your choices compared to their choices, what you're forecasting as their choices, and then weighting that by the likelihoods so that you can end up arranging these in order of preference. Paper looks good to me. So I pick paper. All right, my fourth step here is now I'm going to make a choice. So decision weight assignment is arranging them in order of preference, and which I'm going to do here weighted by what I think my opponent's going to pick. And I pick paper. And then post-event assessment. How did that work out? What would I do differently next time? Hey, that's a pretty good cartoon there. Tattoos, $50. Tattoos removed, $10,000. Oh, those joking comic writers. All right. So that's an example. And now let me give you a foreign exchange market example of all that. So again, the idea here is what kind of steps is a foreign currency dealer or a bank or whatever going to go through when they are choosing to buy or sell a currency. And I want to work in here eventually which stage did the forecasts come in, all right, and how they affected it. Okay, well, here's a foreign exchange one. Possible future states of the world and their likelihoods. I think there's a 4/5 chance that the U.S. will raise interest rates. And when you raise interest rates, it tends to cause a currency to appreciate because people want to buy that currency to buy the assets that offer that higher interest rate. And for whatever reason, and notice here's a forecast here. For whatever reason, I've decided there's only a 1/5 chance that they lower the interest rate. And so now what are my choices? Well, my choices are to buy dollars or sell dollars, all right? And obviously it's more complicated than this, but buy dollars or sell dollars. If I buy dollars, let's say given the amount of dollars I'm going to buy, and the Fed does raise interest rates, I'm going to win $100 because I bought the currency that's going to appreciate. And if I sell, I'm going to lose $100. Again, we're going to have to assume the amount of the appreciation or depreciation relative to how much currency you've bought. Then, but if they lower the interest rate, I'll lose 100 if I buy dollars, and I'll win 100 if I sell dollars. So, multiplying those likelihoods across again here, what do we end up with? Well, there's a 4/5 chance, or you're winning $80 here, right? A 4/5 chance of $100 is $80. But I also have a 1/5 chance of losing there. Well, what's 1/5 of negative 100? It's 20. So 80 minus 20 is 60. And negative 80 plus 20 is negative 60. So you're looking across here, and those are your expected values for each one. And then you're thinking, which one do I want to do? Well, one of them wins me $60 and one of them loses me 60. Selling dollars when I think there's a 4/5 chance of the Fed raising interest rates is a dumb thing to do. So I instead buy dollars. That's a very simplistic example, but I wanted to do one with exchange rates as well. So you go through and you look and you say, well, let's see. The choice of buying dollars is worth $60 to me. The choice of selling dollars is worth negative $60 to me. Ergo, I buy the dollar. And then hopefully one day do post-event assessment. All right, except that the world isn't, okay, so here it starts to get fun. In reality, people do not generate objective expected value forecasts, all right? So what I did over here was very objective forecasts here with, this 3/4 of this, 1/4 of that, and so on. People don't really do that, and they're unable to, remember what I said about risk versus uncertainty? A risky world would permit that. An uncertain world does not, because you ain't got all the information. So they don't generate objective expected value forecasts. Not only do the data simply not exist, which I just said, but psychologists say we rely on heuristics, shortcuts that normally give fairly accurate answers with less effort. However, they also lead to persistent biases. All this is in the book. The big three heuristics are availability, representativeness, and anchoring. These affect the currency market by contributing to volatility and bandwagons. Volatility is just the currency price bouncing around, and man, oh man, I'm going to show you some data later. The currency prices are extremely volatile. And then bandwagons. Hey, everyone's buying the Deutschmark, and everyone's buying the Deutschmark. Because why are you buying the mark? Well, everybody else is. So that's what a bandwagon is. Talk about all that now. Okay, what's availability? It's used to decide how often you think something happened in the past or how likely it is in the future. In general, the easier it is to imagine, the more often you think it happened in the past or the more likely you think it will be in the future. And that's pretty reasonable, right? Instances of snow in January come to mind more easily than instances of snow in July, and correct. But more than actual past frequency makes something available. The availability biases that I want to talk about here are events that were more recent or dramatic or fit preconceptions. So things that are very dramatic stand out in your mind more heavily. They are therefore easier to imagine. Fumble! They are therefore easier to imagine, and you will overrate the likelihood of events that were dramatic in the past or were more recent. The more recently it happened, the more it's in your mind. So people will overrate the likelihood of events that were more recent, that were very dramatic, or that fit preconceptions. And that's a very good one to talk about when we're talking about a currency market, because you will tend to not notice things that don't fit what you believe represents how the world works, but you will very much notice the things that did fit. All right. So if there were an equal number of things that did and didn't fit, in your mind, that's not true. You noticed more of the ones that did fit. Those jumped out at you. You're like, oh yeah, I knew that was going to happen. That's exactly right. I always say that. And yet you didn't notice the other 6 times when the opposite happened. So, for example, there's a rule of thumb that if a baseball team scores 3 or more runs in a single inning, that they have a 70% chance of winning the game in a single inning, not 3 runs over the first, second, and 5th inning, but in a single inning. So I look at that, I notice that, and I don't really. Hey, look! Sure enough, they won just like I thought they would. All right, so that's what the preconceptions thing is. Now, how does that fit in the currency market? Well, more recent or dramatic events may be overweighted. Oh wow, this was something else. The Brexit led the pound to fall from $1.36 to its lowest level in 3 decades in just a week. All right, it recovered. Nobody thought it was going to stay. By the way, though, I was about to travel to London. I went ahead and prepaid for my hotel right when it went down, and that was your dollar, so I was helping you out. The dollar rose in 1980, in response to 2 Libyan jets being shot down by the U.S. Navy. Very dramatic events, and they led to massive, much larger exchange rate movements that then ended up recovering, in the days and months after that. There's an entire literature on overreaction in currency and stock markets. So the idea that a dramatic event causes a rapid reaction, just as we've got up here. And it's much easier to imagine some things that fit your preconceptions. I've already said this. Variables that you consider unimportant because they don't fit your theory will not become part of your forecast because you don't even notice them, all right? Those that do may take on too much importance. And one of the interesting things is that over time in the currency market, different variables have featured as important to currency dealers. And when they were considered important, they had an impact on the market. When the dealers didn't think they were important, they didn't have an impact, even though, honestly, the underlying structure of the economy was no different. But what they paid attention to was different. Therefore, what the currency prices moved to was different. All right, representativeness. This is probably the hardest one to understand. It's used when you're trying to decide what process caused a certain outcome or what outcome a process will cause. In general, people expect the outcome to very closely resemble the process. For example, one might predict that a fairly weighted coin would create a pattern of tosses something near 50% heads and 50% tails. Or, seeing that pattern, one might assume that it was created by a coin. Seeing this next pattern, one might expect that the coin was unfairly weighted towards heads. So the process is tossing the coin. The outcome is the number of heads and tails. So the first one you're told the process. You have a fairly weighted coin. Then I guess I'll get about 50% heads and 50% tails. The second one you're told the outcome, and you have to figure out the process. That's an unfairly weighted coin is what that is. It's unfairly weighted towards heads. So that's how representativeness works, and fairly reasonable, but it introduces biases. First of all, people assume too little randomness in the real world. They figure that every outcome has a very specific cause, and every cause creates a very specific outcome. For example, on the 50-50 on heads, people are not tolerant of much variation away from 50-50. They'll tolerate some, but statistically speaking, they tolerate much too little. And so they tend to attribute to certain specific causes what's truly actually chance, right? They look for reversion towards the mean. That is, if you toss a bunch of heads, the coin will compensate by giving more tails later. But the coin doesn't remember what it tossed. The coin's not like, hey man, we're going to make up for all those heads later, or we'll be in big trouble. Got to start tossing some tails. The coin doesn't know what it tossed before. Coins are stupid, right? So, but people expect reversion towards the mean. And the more, this is awesome here. I got a great book on this. First I checked it out of the TCU library, and then I went ahead and bought myself a copy by a guy named Scott Plouse, Plous, and maybe from 1990. Easy to read book, all about all these various biases and heuristics. And he had a quiz at the beginning of the book. And we went through the quiz. You realized I'm making all the exact mistakes or not mistakes, because sometimes it's a question of preferences. But I'm doing everything the book then predicted I would do. And I got nailed on this one right here. The more detailed you make a scenario, the more likely people think it is. This is fascinating. A nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia seems less probable to the average person than a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia caused by tensions over the Ukraine, even though the latter is simply a subset of the former. I mean, a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia caused by tensions over the Ukraine is one of the many reasons for a nuclear war between the U.S. and Russia. But it's easier to, notice it's easier to imagine, so it says availability plays a role here too, and it means that, okay, that if that's the outcome, with the more detailed scenario, then you begin to think that that those causes could certainly cause that outcome. I guess the second one, really, the cause is the tensions over the Ukraine, and the outcome is the nuclear war between the U.S. and China. Well, where does that show up in the currency market? Participants assume that there must be some underlying reason for every price movement. The market doesn't play dice. I remember my father-in-law, after he retired, was watching all these investment shows. And he said, you know what? I think they're making it up. Because he said, after the fact, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. We're just making it up. You're finding a justification for why Walmart fell yesterday when maybe some big institutional buyer unloaded their Walmart and it drove the price down, and then the other people noticed it and they followed it. But there was really no solid reason. Maybe they were wanting to diversify, a little bit away from Walmart. But people tend to think that if the price moved, there's got to be a reason. And in some circumstances with representatives, they'll act with more confidence than they really should, because the more specific the scenario, the more sure people become that it will occur. So we'll talk about some more of that later. Anchoring. This is the third of the three heuristics. Sounds like a group from the 1950s. And anchoring is the most fascinating one to me. Anchoring occurs when an individual makes an estimate by starting at some initial value. Psychologists have discovered that people tend to anchor very firmly to that initial value, regardless of how it was generated. Okay, so let me give you an example. One of the studies I read about using this was they had people come into a room and they spun this wheel in front of them that had numbers from 0 to 100. And, well, before they did that, they said, what percentage of countries in the UN, I'm sorry, in Africa are in the UN, the United Nations? Wait, don't answer yet. Then they would spin the wheel. 35. And now, so 35, plus or minus 35, how many? And, so if your original estimate was going to be 80, then, well, 45 more than that. All right, whatever. People locked on to the number they saw on the wheel, even though they knew it was entirely random. They locked onto the number they saw on the wheel. That doesn't mean that everyone said 35 if it came up 35, but those people gave lower estimates than the people where it stopped at 85. And I used to do this very thing in this class, International Monetary. I would hand out a survey and ask a variety of these questions and then see how people answered and then share it with everybody. Say, look, you're doing these exact same things. And one of the things I did was, how many countries are there in Africa? And then I did 15. Well, this number is here randomly and everyone has a different number. That wasn't entirely true. Some people had a 15. Half the class had a 15 there. Half the class had a 25. And I said, that number has nothing to do with the answer. It's random on everybody's survey. Every semester but one, the people with the 25 estimated almost exactly 10 more countries in Africa than the people with the 15. It's wild. It's fascinating. And I always, when I get to this point of the lecture, I'd always say, and I don't know why. And so, because I can see the logical reason for availability and representativeness, those usually give you the right answer. I'm not sure why this one works. And so I finally looked it up before I made these PowerPoints, and you can see here, they're not entirely sure why it happens. By the way, I said it worked every time but one. Okay, we used to get a lot of MBA students in this class. And, oh, good, graduate students. Yeah, but they're not economists. And they haven't been required to take econ. And they weren't always very good. And so we finally talked the business school out of allowing this class as an elective for the MBA students. But worse than that, one time, one of the MBA students, and this was in, year 2000, one of the MBA students estimated that there were 0 independent countries in Africa because they were all colonies. Clearly not someone who was a liberal arts major as an undergrad. So anyway, that threw all the averages off when somebody said 0. Okay, let's see here. Oh, and then the anchoring biases. Well, hell, anchoring is already a bias. And it's easy to look up these things on cartoons and so forth for all of these heuristics. There's lots of them. Let's see, what's my first one here? Breathtaking, isn't it? The seller wanted 5,000, but I got it for just 4,500. Oh, I get it. Because the initial price anchored them. So they're like, well, they wanted 5,000, but I got a hell of a deal. I got it for 4,500. Yeah, it's not worth $1. And what have we got over here? What are the last 2 digits in your social security number? 11 and 99. Now, how much will you pay for this wine if you were to bid for it? This person said 30, that person said 80. And that's the way it works. Oh, and then in the foreign exchange market. In a calm market, agents tend to start their forecast of new rates at the same level of the old one. This reinforces stability. But if markets become more volatile, then agents' focal point shifts to the change that took place from yesterday. Rather than thinking, I wonder if the rate will stay the same as it was today, they shift to, I wonder if it will change as much as it did yesterday. So that the anchoring, then volatility begets volatility. The more volatile a market becomes, the more people shift the focus of their anchoring from levels to rates of change. And so their new forecast is not a level, their new forecast is a rate of change. Right? And then, hang on just a second, I want to check something. Okay, I'm going to get through this part and then I'm going to stop the video and then restart it because I want to break this up a little bit. So we've got a ways to go. One more thing. Well, no, let's stop it here. I'm going to stop it and then restart.